watched them as they brought it together, but I haven't been back since to see it. Yeah, that looked really amazing. Yeah. Yeah. It's gorgeous. That's so cool. Thank you so much. It's nice talking to you. Yep.
I am going to say really, sorry, that is very loud. I am going to say really quick before we get started, you should be sitting next to someone because we are going to be talking, and hopefully you have a printout. If you don't have a printout, we'll have a link to stuff on the screen. Now I'll back away.
Okay, welcome everyone. We've reached the time, it's 11:10, and we're excited to get going on this next session. This next session is called Teaching the Yazidi Genocide with a Narrative-Based Approach. My name is Ronnie K. Odell. I'm Associate Professor of Political Science and Global Studies here at Seton Hill University. I'm also the coordinator of our political science program. I also teach in our Genocide and Holocaust Studies certificate. I teach several classes. And I thought I would start out by introduction, talking just very shortly about my experience teaching one class in particular, which is comparative genocide studies, or genocide studies in comparative perspective. I've taught that for a number of years, and the first few iterations I really taught it from an analytical macro perspective, going through many different genocides, talking about the numbers, talking about the policies that led to the genocides. And after a few times of teaching it, I really realized there was something missing, which is connecting to the individual, understanding the individual's stories, understanding the way in which people experienced the genocide, not only looking at the large-scale issues, the ways in which groups of people are affected, but also looking at the ways in which individual people experience a terrifying situation in which their own survival and the survival of their families and their people group are affected and also challenged and possibly taken away. So I started introducing sections on empathy into that class, sections on how do we think about this from those individual perspectives. I introduced storytelling, and it was really amazing the difference in the way the students talked about the material when they reflected on it and approached the material. So I bring that experience in to say, I'm very excited about our speakers today who are going to talk about how they bring the issue of empathy or narrative into their teaching, and in this case about the Yazidi genocide. So I would like to introduce first Kim Sleeper, who works as a high school teacher at Lincoln High and is also obtaining her master's in history at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and who has used empathy, narrative for, and narrative in her teaching, and she'll tell us more about that today. And then Haroon al-Hayder, who also worked at Lincoln High in the past, but is now a graduate student at the University of Lincoln in Nebraska. He's getting a master's in communication and interpersonal family communication, and he's also a TA and has much experience with introducing narrative into his classroom. So please help me welcome them, and let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Dr. Odell. Just want to reintroduce myself again. My name is Kim Sleeper. I teach in Lincoln, Nebraska. I teach 3 sections of English 9 co-taught with a special education teacher, and then I do 2 sections of senior literature electives. So I do Holocaust and genocide literature first semester, and then second semester I do banned books, as in censored books, not like the music band. So a little bit about what we want to equip teachers with today is because there's a lot of I would actually say a lack of information online for teachers about Yazidis, Yazidism, and the 2014 genocide. And so really, really what we want to be able to do for you is to equip you with narrative techniques, particularly about the 2014 Yazidi genocide, but then really just about any of the modern genocides that have happened since the Holocaust, and also in trauma-informed ways that respect survivors and others in the community. The school that I teach in, we have a very large Yazidi population, and so doing that, how do you teach survivors, youth survivors of genocide in a way that is not going to re-traumatize them in the classroom? So first thing, you should have a kind of a packet, a printed handout. Go ahead and grab that. We're just at the first page here in order to demonstrate some narrative techniques before we even get into any background information. We want to engage with a poem first. So this is a poem called Yazidi I Am. If you are online, there is a link up there, bit.ly/Yazidi with an E. So we're just going to take a few minutes now. Go ahead and go through a first read by yourself and highlight or underline words, phrases, or structures that stand out to you in this poem. let's take some time, locate some people around you, and share what you annotated, what stood out to you about the poem, or maybe what questions you have about what you read.
So we right away after this? We're gonna do it? No, okay. Hi, everyone. As Ronnie K. Introduced me, thank you very much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. My name is Haroon Hayder. I'm from the Yazidi community. I moved to the United States in 2016 as an immigrant, and I lived in Minnesota for 4 years. Then I moved to Lincoln, Nebraska in 2020, and I've been living there ever since. And as we said that in Lincoln community, it has one of the largest Yazidi community there in the nation. A lot of them moved to the United States after the 2014 genocide. And as Ronnie mentioned, that I worked at Lincoln High with Cam for 4 years, and I was a school community coordinator, working with the students and making sure that they get the resources to develop their skills in the careers and to get out there and pursue the careers that they want to pursue. Through that, we did some work, doing panels about the Yazidi community and the Yazidi genocide. But it's truly a pleasure and a privilege to be here today, to be invited to this conference, to be able to give you a glimpse about the Yazidi culture, Yazidi community, and then the Yazidi genocides. Before I start, I just want to, there's one quote that I got from a book that I was reading, and I hope that you keep this quote in mind as you go through this presentation, because it really talks about the extinction of the Yazidis and other minorities in their indigenous lands. This quote was by Leonard Woolley, one of the British archaeologists who was doing his work was excavation of relics or old artifacts that belong to the indigenous communities like the Babylonians and Sumerians in the city of Ur. And while they were doing an excavation, they found like a wooden, there was like a wooden piece of panel. It was like, when they discovered it, they figured that it was like more than thousands of years old. And on that specific day, in the Iraqi desert, that was the first time that it rained. And in a second, And as he would describe it, as a plumage on the wings of a butterfly. That rain and that wind just eradicated a piece that has just been discovered that belonged to the Sumerians and has been there for thousands of years. Maybe maybe it had not been excavated, it would still be there. But the story is about the minorities and the Yazidis and the Mandayans and the Sabaeans that are on the brink of extinction if we don't take action. So Yazidi, and maybe some of you know who the Yazidis are, and maybe some of you who have not heard the word Yazidi or the community or even the genocide, you are in the right place. And where the Yazidi origin and the culture and the beliefs, this particular community is one of the most understudied, under-researched community throughout their history. And there are reasons that has not been studied, and there are reasons that led to not being researched. But really talking about, so for this presentation, I'm not going to go deeper into what Yazidism is, and that's going to take hours. But I'm just going to give you an overview of the Yazidi origin, culture, and traditions, and then we will get into the narrative where my colleague Kim will talk about how to really teach the Yazidi genocide. But for my job here is to really give you an overview of the Yazidi culture, history, and tradition and celebrations, and also the genocide. Who are Yazidis? So Yazidis are indigenous to the Mesopotamia. So if you don't know what Mesopotamia is, Mesopotamia falls somewhere, some part of Syria, Turkey, and Iran, and Iraq. And that's where they were indigenous to that part. And when they were in that particular geographic location, there were other minorities like Assyrians, Chaldeans, and even goes back to the Sumerians and Babylonians who lived in that specific geographical region. And that's what the Yazidis said, that we are the descendants of the Babylonians and the Sumerians. And Yazidis are an ethno-religious minority. Our ethno-religious minority, if you look at it philosophically, because if you look at it superficially, you say that no, you're not a monotheist. You are a polytheist because you have all of these other natural elements that you find sacred, that you find really holy, and you've even created names for those, and you've incorporated in your religious texts and in worships. But if you look deeper into that, it's not a pagan religion, or it's not a polytheist religion. It all goes down to one Almighty, which we call it Khuda. And Khuda means the one who created himself. Khuda is an Indo-European Kurmanji, falls within the Kurdish language, derived from the Indo-European tree of language. It has elements of Persian, linguistics roots in it. And they are originally, as I said, from Mesopotamia. The religion shows a very deep connection, as I said in my beginning. It's the Mesopotamian phase, incorporating elements of worship, rituals that have persisted throughout the centuries. And if you go and look into our rituals and celebrations, those celebrations have survived thousands of years and centuries where we practice it today. It might not be exactly the same thing, but they goes back to the same meaning and same traditions. For example, would be Sarsal. Sarsal is our new year, and the new year, that Sarsal actually was a word used in a Babylonian ritual of the new year, the newness of the year, where it's particularly when the spring comes. Then everything becomes new, and then they celebrate the newness of the new year, the productivity, the new life, the plant, the nature, and all of that. We speak Kurmanji. It's a dialect of Kurdish. Some of the beliefs, as I said, is the monotheistic one. The Yazidi also spelled Yazidi, Ezdi, Ezdahi, Yazidi, Yazda. So all of these words comes from the similar term, which called the one who follow God. So, but in my own language, we say Ezdi. It's to it. It's not Yazidi or all that, but it's Ezidi. That sometimes makes it different because there's some interpretation with the word Yazidi, and sometimes they interpreted that into a different sect in Islam, where the Yazidi was one of the prominent Islamic individual. They sometimes misinterpret our religion and tied our religion to that person, which is absolutely different. So language matters, so pay attention. And then we also believe that there are 7 angels. So we believe that God entrusted this creation to 7 angels. And then the archangel is Taus Malek, and the Taus Malek is Azazil. And we'll get into it a little bit more, how that gets misinterpreted as being a devil or Satan and all that, and how that led to genocides to Yazidis. So the peacock, this is the, as I was talking to John about the symbols of the Yazidis, and these are some of the evidence that if you can look at that image over there, those are hieroglyphic language that, it's the very first language that was discovered in the world in the Mesopotamian civilization. And it's shown in our religious symbol. There's like a shrine, and there's like a peacock angel, and those hieroglyphic languages there, and then that sign. So it really shows our roots and our history there. Primarily passed, and then our religion has been passed orally, and there isn't a textbook. We don't have like a Bible or Torah or Quran like the Abrahamic religions. Some of that is argumentative because a lot of it was due to persecutions and then the genocide and the lack of trust in the writings, and also the systemic suppression, the systemic oppression that did not create a safe environment for these people to access literacy. And it all comes down to being a systemic barrier. And Taus Malek, a little bit more about the Taus Malek is it's a hierarchical structure of the Yazidism, includes 7 angels, and the Taus Malek, the peacock angel, as the most significant figure entrusted by the God with the guardianship of the world and the protection of the Yazidi people. A lot of you might have question about why peacock angel. And the peacock angel, a lot of it it's really some scholars have argued that this kind of symbolizes power, the existence when the peacock angel open up with the feathers and all that. It resembles power, but in our connotations and in our mythology, it's a presence of trust, presence of peace, presence of diversity because of the colorful of animal. And a lot of them, they have misinterpreted as of being worshiping God and worshiping animals. We're not worshiping animals. It's just a representation of the diversity in our religion that we find nature sacred. Everything in nature is connected and interconnected. And you will find it in my later that how we view nature and how nature is part of us and how we are part of nature. And you might also make some connections with the indigenous community, Native American community here, because there's a lot of similarities between how we view the nature and they view nature. And there's a lot of similarity there. Misrepresentation, so and Christians and Muslims and some other religions, they have mistaken Taus Malak to be a figure of Satan. And they have stories who have created because he was a fallen angel, because he was the only one that did not obey to the God, and then therefore he was sent to hell to just be there, because he did not obey to when the world was created, and he was the only one who did when Adam's mold was created, the humanity came from it. And Taus Malik was not they interpreted it that way, that he was the only one who did not bow to the creation of Adam. Therefore, he was sent to hell for refusing that. And that misinterpretation has been used as an excuse by some extremists from the Muslims and the Christian communities to use as an excuse to validate the death of the Yazidis and the persecution of the Yazidis and all that. If you want to learn more about that story of that, it's actually there's the story that I learned and how that ties into Yazidi not being a dualistic religion. We don't believe in hell and paradise. And we also believe in reincarnation when I get into it, but there's a story that the Taus Malik has cried, and his tears drenched the hell. There's no fire in the hell, and therefore it's only peace in the world. There's only heaven. The Yazidi has caused Yazidis throughout the history, inaccurately misinterpreting their religion, being a devil worshippers, and devil worshippers has been the single most powerful element weaponized against the Yazidis' persecutions and led to genocides. To us, we have gone through 74 genocides. Lalish. So Lalish to our Yazidi, in our mythology, Lalish is the center of earth. The Yazidi, the world was not fermented until Lalish came down to the earth. And then when Lalish came down to the earth, that's where the connection between the skies and the earth was connected. The universe was created. The nature got created because Lalish came to the earth, and it was a fermentation for that. And the Lalish is located in Kurdistan, in Dahok, between the three mountains. It's our holiest site. Yazidi must make a pilgrimage to the Lalish. Yazidi around the world. Yazidis have historically resided in, as I said, in the Mesopotamian area, and that's Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and then often in the Nineveh plain, Shekan, and they have been extremely uprooted from their indigenous land. They have been moved around. They have uprooted from one land to another, and then from one to another and then they will keep moving around. I know my family have moved my ancestors were moved from Turkey. This is like maybe 200 or 300 years ago. And then somewhere we end up in Iraq. And then from within Iraq, we were removed and uprooted 5 times from our ancestral land. And a lot of our ancestral land were taken away by force and by the campaigns to exterminate our communities. And the Yazidi communities are found in Syria, Turkey, Armenia. There's also in Armenia, Georgia, European countries, Russia, USA, and Canada. That migration happened after they've experienced genocides. They wanted to leave and find safety and security. And Germany is one of the most populated country by the Yazidis. It's the second home to the Yazidis, as we Yazidi community call it. And then there's Canada, and then the United States and other countries. Holidays, we have the Yazidis have 3 major religious celebrations. We have a New Year, which is called Salsal. It's in April. We have also a pilgrimage to Sheikh Hadi's tomb in Lalish, and we call it Jama' Sheikh Hadi. And we also in December we have fasting holiday. We fast for 3 days. I'm not going to get in detail in that, and if you're interested to learn more about those, just for the sake of time, but you can always come and talk to me or reach out to me. We can talk a little bit more about that. But a lot of the New Year, a lot of Christians make a connection with Easter, but ours is a little bit different, and because a lot of the misinterpretation comes from the similarities. They say, oh yeah, you share some of our similarities, therefore maybe you came from the Christian background, or maybe you come from the Islamic background or Judaism or all that. We actually share similarity with a lot of other religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, and Mithraism, and Zoroastrianism, pre-Islamic religions, pre-Abrahamic religions. Sorry, all of those connections. That itself speaks value of how ancient this faith is and this specific group is. The genocide and Yazidis, we have experienced a series of genocidal campaigns, and none of them even may be known to you, and that speaks volume of how oppressed and marginalized and underrepresented Yazidis have been throughout their history, and because now a lot of it has been came from the Ottoman Empire, which is the Ottoman governor of Mosul, Muhammad Pasha al-Jalili, between 1805 and 1820. Then there's the Kurdish Emir Muhammad Pasha al-Rawandozi, 1832. Ottoman General Hafiz Pasha, 1844. And Ottoman General Omar Wahhabi Pasha, 1891. So all of these genocide were almost similar, and they targeted a specific component or faith, and their strategic goal is to exterminate this faith. You either change, convert, because you're a heterodox, and therefore you need to, because you're different, you need to adapt and change. And in some way they were successful, because we adapted so many traditions that they were not ours. But this led to, enslavement, killing of our children, elderly, and holding our girls, female women as sex slaves. And so we're talking about maybe before the 21st century, but then seeing this in the 21st century was unbelievable. What I'm going to get a little bit on that, which is the ISIS attack in 2014. This is the ISIS attack on 2014, August 3rd. And this was a systemic campaign to really eradicate the Yazidi religion at once, like all cornered in one place in Sinjar, to just take care of it, get the job done. And 5,000 to 7,000 Yazidi killed, more than 5,000 Yazidi kidnapped, destruction of more than 20 Yazidi holy sites in Sinjar, the destruction of more than 80% of the Yazidi homes in Sinjar, more than 400,000 Yazidi were displaced, and they're still in the diaspora, they're still in the IDP camps. Imagine being in the tents for 10 years, and they're still in the tents. 5,000 to 7,000 died, more than 150 of children and elderly died due to thirst and hunger. That pushed the United States to take action, to take airstrikes to save the Yazidis. A lot of them didn't make it. Thousands of them didn't make it. Kocho village, mass killing of 412 men and over 900 women and children were enslaved. Does anyone know Nadia Murad? Okay, Nadia Murad is the Nobel Peace Laureate. She is a sole survivor of her family, and her family was about, I think, between 10 to 12 family members, and this is, except her extended family. This whole village was exterminated, and. She was a sole survivor, and she's advocated for women's rights, and she's advocating for the Yazidi community. And there was several mass killings in Haroon, Penne, Solach, and other villages, and their bodies are still being excavated as we speak now. 150 to 200,000 Yazidis trapped in mountain Sinjar. Hundreds of children and elderly died due to thirst and hunger. And siege was broken by Yazidi YPG and the U.S. Air Forces. And the death path to freedom, the trapped Yazidis walked 200 kilometers. That's about how many miles? Many miles. Many died. This was in the summer of August, because if you know Iraq, in August it gets scorching hot. You can't walk that far without water. You will die. So a lot of them didn't make it. And many elderly and disabled were, a lot of those disabled, and they were just left behind. They were left in the houses, and ISIS came and finished them and killed them in the most horrific way. And there's actually a video of one elderly man getting killed by an ISIS militant, even hiding in their room. They open the door, and then they find out those two elderly in their 80s or 90s, they just inhumanly get killed. Displaced people, they think, after surviving the genocide is done, but it's not done. It continues, the trauma, everything continues, and about 500,000 Yazidi displaced, over 80% of them in Iraq. They're still in a dire need for shelter, and basic needs, and harsh weather and lack of sanitation are among many problems. 5,000 to 7,000 Yazidi hostages, largest enslavement in the 21st century. They used our women as sex slaves. They resold for $100, $20, $1,000. So it was like a bazaar of selling and reselling our women. 5,000 to 7,000 Yazidi hostages, mostly women and children, were enslaved. ISIS used Yazidi women as sex slaves, and confirmed in the Dabiq magazine and other social media, and also the UN group in the aftermath of the genocide. It was organized and formed to document the tragedies and the crimes that were committed to the Yazidi community. And the other thing was our children, like the who left behind, they brainwashed them and they used them as human shields for the U.S.-led coalitions, suicide vests and all that. And also, because as I said, this was a systemic eradication of our faith, they wanted to eradicate everything. Any symbol, the being, to eradicate and make sure that the temples, the shrines, everything is just erased from the existence. 20 temples destroyed, and 15 religious people were burned inside one temple in Sinjar. And elderly and disabled at sacred sites were killed. Because we, in our community, because of those shrines, they tell us we're pagan. And those shrines and those sacred holy sites are just a representation, or just a place where people come together to pray. And to pray. We're not worshiping a wall or something. It's just a representation of the holiness of our religion. Some people wanted to go because of the connection with the faith. Sometimes, like, you go and seek healing, seek safety, and being killed in the most safest space in your faith, it can't get any worse than that. So, now I'm going to give the platform to my colleague to kind of talk about the narrative and how are we teaching this, and in what way we're teaching this in the classrooms, and to educate about the Yazidi genocide, and the approach that we're taking to make sure that there is awareness, there is advocacy, there's empathy about the Yazidi genocide, and that we can teach so we can prevent this from happening to any of us, anyone, any group in the world. So, please.
So we process through a lot of information. Though it's really important to interact with narratives, you don't just want to send students in, or even like send yourself into some of these narratives without proper background information. And so we gave you that poem at the start of the session to look over it and see, what are just some things that you stood out to you, whether you knew a lot about the Yazidi genocide prior to Haroon's information, or whether you knew nothing at all and had never heard of Yazidis. So we're going to return back to that poem, go through, you can annotate it in a different way, but find some connections from the background information and note them. What are the number of genocides? How is the poet feeling and expressing the feeling in the poem? What are the events that they're mentioning? I think we're out of printed copies. If you'd like to look at the digital handout, go to bit.ly/Yazidi, YEZIDI. Take about one more minute to discuss with the people around you and finding connections. Okay, so we want to go through and talk about how to encounter genocide and Holocaust studies through testimony. I think a lot of teachers who and professors who have taught Holocaust and genocide classes are familiar with methodology of incorporating testimony, but I would argue that testimony is not necessarily the same as narrative, kind of depending on how you approach it and how you teach it and how you offer it to the people that you are teaching through. So what we're going to take some time to do afterward, we are going to watch a video. Haroon mentioned someone from Kocho, the village where Nadia Murad, peace Nobel Peace Laureate is from. We are going to listen to one of the testimonies that are transcribed for you, but we're going to give you some time, probably about 3 to 5 minutes, to preview the printed testimonies that are in the packet there. Again, if you don't have the printed copy, it's bit.ly/YEZIDI, Yazidi. And look kind of through these and choose 2 to 3 that you want to annotate, and you might look there through what events or ideas are you now familiar with, what are maybe some effects or ideas or events that you still wonder about, and what are some connections that you can make with these printed copies of the testimonies. Let's maybe instead take 1 more minute, and then we're going to watch a video testimony from one of the transcriptions. Okay, so if you flip over to testimony number 4, that is the testimony that we're going to watch that was transcribed for you in the packet, but instead we're also going to listen to the survivor testimony, because truly nothing really replaces listening to the human voice. So Haroon touched on it briefly about Kocho, the village, and what kind of atrocities it experienced. We're going to mention Nadia Murad a little bit more at the end, and we're going to mention her book where she really details everything that happened right prior to the genocide, during the genocide, and then after the genocide in her village. So this woman is from her same village.
مالا ما بری فرمانی ما بهایی کلش خورد شکر بو از بوم داغام بو خشکام بو و برایم بو متام بو ملوی مالی دبون حیاتا ما خوش بوم بحالی خود رادی بون منام بینج بونش عائلة تامه وشوان جد دو هات يعني دو جهاتنا هتان هلا شدوان وقف ملوي درد في شارتينا وهتان هو يعني قالك جماعيناش ما يدخل كوتو ويشنيفوان ما تامنا اللي بدايا وأصحابي يعني إنه فيدري كوتو دا كامنا وبراي منا شعورك كالك بزحمة وقت زلامة برايك هبي بتنيبي الفيديو هيك في مقبرة شكري في جهمو إيه يعني إيه حفلة ما بو دعوة ما بو وحاليا هبويا مقبرة جماعي بجا وقت زلام درباس بي وفي مقبرة وساببيني شعورك كالك بزحمة از بوم نادیا بو کاترین بو نسرین بو بس بو مدویا وكبري وقت استاد ما في مالي مالا نادیا مراد تقريبا بونا 8 سال ميكش هرسي چارك نادي يعني دوجي تشون غادي بالرحمين مستمر يعني مالا كسب ترتاد من استاد ما في دري ما قال مدرسه خود كل بام تشنو مدرسه بغراز وبرازاويه كتشكتر يعني قالك يا خوش بو بس نهم زحمه اسلام يكل دور اخو النبيني نها بالك مدرسه نها بالك بري يعني مدویان ها وقتی از درباز بویم يعني نبشعوره کی بزحمت از درباز بام از در وقتی از درباز بام همود موجود بانا وقت روشت بری دعوت بو هن مدرس بو خوشی بو حاليا اصنها ابتني الكوتشو دايما اصغر خبتني نابينه
So with that, we're exploring some different types of narrative that can be used. I think that a couple of the sessions that we've seen thus far have indicated that narrative is not just necessarily listening to testimony, but you can also construct stories from photos, from poems, from reading different novels or different pieces of literature. And so what we're gonna do, I would say find a space in the packet somewhere where you feel like you can write 15 individual words. I know there might be not a lot of room, or if you have your own piece of paper, you can use that as well. So this is something that I do with my students, both at the start of the Yazidi unit in my Holocaust and Genocide literature class, but I also do this at the start of the Indigenous Genocide unit in North America, just to interact with maybe if there are any sort of preconceived notions that students have, or just to interact with all of the stories that are within one photo, even if it doesn't tell a lot in the caption or you don't know any further information. So what you will do, we're not gonna do that ending part of at the end, choose 3 photos that stood out to you and discuss with people around you. I normally have my students do that in a class period, but what you will do is take each photo and describe it in one word. So one word you would use to describe what is happening in the photo, or one word you would use to describe the essence or the feeling of the photo. So photo number 2, what is a word that you would use to describe what is happening in this photo or the feeling of this photo? It's photo number 3. This is Nadia Murad, if you have never seen her face before. So she is in front of the house that we were just looking at in the testimony video. Photo number 4. Number 5. The next couple photos are from a collaborative storytelling project with photographer Jim Lamason. He came to Lincoln in 2017 and 2018 and collaborated with the Yazidi community in Lincoln and had them bring an item that they brought with them from Iraq or an item to them that was special. And then you can see at the bottom there, he would print out the photo after he had taken a picture of the item and had each person annotate what was happening at the photo. I know that maybe someone will reference the fact that there will be published proceedings of the conference. We have information about this photo project, and I will tell you where you can find more information about this project as well. But here's photo number 6. You might recognize Lalish. Photo number 7, what is one word you would use to describe the feeling of the photo or what is happening? Photo number 8. As Haroon mentioned, there is a sizable Yazidi population in Armenia, so this is a temple in Armenia. Photo number 9. And just for the sake of time, we're actually just going to do photo number 10, but I'll give you access to these slides later. So again, one word you would use to describe what you see or the feeling of the photo. Okay, so if you would, especially if you are teachers, I would love if you opened up this link that is polleverywhere.com, and we are able to do some work just to kind of get an understanding of what people are already actively doing. Or students, if you have done anything with using testimony in the classroom, what are the methods that you've used to engage with it? So you can either scan that QR code if you give me like 1 minute to log in and make it active, or go to the link pollev.com/KimberlySlee with no PER 910. Or you can also participate via text. Okay, apologies, it's active now. So again, the question is, what methods do you currently use while teaching with testimony, and what agreements and expectations do you establish before teaching about sensitive or heavy topics? So if you are a student, what methods have professors or teachers incorporated in the classroom if you're interacting with survivor testimony? Or are there any sort of like community agreements or things that you go over in class, maybe before a story exchange or any other possible difficult topic that you're interacting with in class? Okay, so it looks like we're doing a lot of reflection that happens afterwards. Some of us are doing things like setting up community norms and expectations of empathy and respect beforehand. Maybe a narrative depiction in a film or a diary, some different photos that we might use before or afterward. I'm gonna keep the poll active and we can return back to it later. Do you like my beagle? I do have a beagle, so there you go. Okay. So now we have the question about if sexual assault was a weapon and is a weapon that is used against the Yazidi in the 2014 genocide, how do we set this up in a trauma-informed way so that we're talking about sexual assault in the classroom, but we're not re-traumatizing students as we are doing that? So I know that a lot of the presenters yesterday referenced the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's guidelines for teaching about the Holocaust. Though some of those are a little bit more specific to teaching about the Holocaust, I think that those offer a really great starting place in order to kind of transfer your thinking and the way that you are approaching other genocides as well. So particularly, I think the ones that are relevant for the 2014 Yazidi genocide include avoiding simple answers to complex questions. It can be really easy for us to say, look, ISIS perpetrated this event, therefore it is just another example of Muslim extremism, and kind of make this sort of black and white, saying who is responsible or why, when instead we need to look at the intricacies and notice that this one example of a genocide is not reflective of the entire Muslim community, and really kind of parse out who is responsible and why. Strive for precision of language, both with background information as set out by Haroon, but then I will also talk about how you can use precision of language without being super graphic when you are setting students up for really difficult materials such as that which mentions or describes sexual assault. Avoiding comparisons of pain. Men and women experienced and were targeted in the genocide quite differently, but we don't want to necessarily say that certain groups received more pain or more suffering than others. Neither, if you are using the Yazidi genocide in conjunction with other genocides in your classroom, do you want to state that certain victims in certain genocides had more pain or had less pain. Translate statistics into people. Background information is fantastic, but the way that we turn those numbers, that 5,000 to 7,000, into individual people is looking through a narrative and empathetic lens, and then making responsible methodological decisions. The USHMM has a lot of really good information for things that you should and should not actively do in the classroom to make sure that you are not handling this information inappropriately, or if you are like me and you teach refugees and recently arrived students, some of which when I teach my Yazidi students, I have to be very careful in ways that I am offering information about the genocide without re-traumatizing them, but rather offering this information to equip them with information about what happened to them, their families, or maybe if they were in the US before the genocide happened, how they can talk about what maybe happened to their communities and their families back home. So the tricky thing with the Yazidi genocide, not that teaching genocide is not tricky at all, but in a typical classroom, you're not going to have students who probably are survivors of modern genocides. I know that my school, which receives a lot of recently arrived refugees, is probably the exception but not the rule in most schools. But primary trauma, there is a very high prevalence of sexual assault, so it is likely that you will have at least one student, if not multiple students, who have been sexually assaulted. And so that you have this array of maybe students who don't know that they have been and haven't been able to identify that, students who know but have not told anyone, or students who are pretty open about it or have worked through it with a mental health professional. Just a statistic I'm talking about K-12 education, so 1 in 9 girls and 1 in 53 boys are sexually assaulted by an adult before the age of 18. So if you're talking about a class of 20 to 30, that statistic is going to be, enough that you need to be careful with how you're introducing this material to your students without re-traumatizing them, even if they're not survivors of a genocide. So if we're talking about trauma-informed education, I know that Nick yesterday talked about a lot of really great approaches to trauma-informed education. At the core of it, if you've heard a lot of things about trauma-informed but you don't really know how to define it, a couple of things is that it's always offering choice. And so you're offering multiple aspects of what students can choose to partake in or engage with, and that you're not saying like, this is the thing that you need to do in order to get the outcome of empathy or respect or understanding that we want. As well, offering control. Now, when we think of control, we often think of a negative aspect of control, but control just really means I know what is coming next. So there's no surprises when you're talking about difficult things such as sexual assault or in the genocide education classroom. I know what to anticipate, and not just in the next minute, but I know what is going to happen in the curriculum in the coming steps and how we might work up to discussing difficult material in the classroom. And then encouraging collaboration as often as possible. I think that we had a great understanding and example of that in our prior session related to narrative 4. But when you're encouraging collaboration, you're encouraging students, whether or not they have experienced these things or not, to be heard at an empathetic human level. So some examples, what I really want to do for the teachers in the room is just equip you with things that you can walk away with. This is on the printed handout for you, but I also have a link up there for you. This is something that I got our school partnered with University of Nebraska-Lincoln with their social worker school, and we have been through years of training to ensure that we are heading toward being a trauma-informed school. And so this is something that I got from that training, setting core values, and this is not just stating these are the norms that we're laying out and we will all abide by them. What I often have students do is pick out what are your top 5 core values. There's a lot of individual written reflection, then they share with the people around them, and then eventually we get to the point where we are voting on those core values as a class. And you can use these. I often do them always at the start of a semester, whether it's for my Holocaust and Genocide Lit classes or not. But I think it's also really good before a specific unit. If you're talking about units in which there's going to be really heavy collaboration, and students are pretty hesitant on that, if you are going to be heading into a unit that has really difficult topics that might hit home for a lot of your students, such as units that talk about sexual assault, you can bring this back and say, hey, these are the top 5 that we voted on. What do we want that to look like? How do we need to go about that? I had a coworker who always tells me clear is kind, and so the more that you are laying these things out, the more that we can go back to that control aspect of I know what is coming next, and I know what is expected of both me and my peers and my teacher, but at the same time, I know that I have voice in what is expected in that. I know that yesterday a session also talked about identifying feelings. It may seem cheesy and it may seem elementary, but truthfully, I keep these printed out in my classroom on tag paper for students to reference frequently. I think that it's really good just to look at the more specific ways that we can identify maybe what we are feeling as we're going through this material, or even when you're interacting with testimony and narrative, really truthfully identifying what is going on with those feelings rather than just saying they're sad. So this one I like because it color codes things. I'm a former ELL teacher, but it also works out from simplistic to more specific. And so oftentimes I will use this when students are doing their own personal reflection, or when students are reading a narrative and interacting with testimony and trying to identify the feelings of the individual and equipping them with some more specific information. This is also an activity that I worked on. I have a wonderful friend who is an art therapist, and there was a moment where I teach the Rwandan genocide and we read a wonderful memoir called The Girl Who Smiled Beads. And so we do a close reading of a couple of pages in which Clementine, the author, is fleeing with her sister Claire. And at the time of the genocide, she is 7 years old, and so the things that she is seeing along the way as they're fleeing, the sounds that she is hearing, she doesn't comprehend them because she's a child. So she thinks that the sounds of people being killed by machetes are thunder. And she asks that, and her brother says, yes, it's thunder. She thinks that when she sees bodies that are laying in the water, that they're sleeping, because she doesn't understand the gravity of the death that is now upon her community. And so we do that. We go through a spoken word poem by a Somali artist called Home by Warsan Shire, and then we look at some primary documents as well. It's very heavy material. And so that's tough to just say like, okay, now go ahead and talk about it with the people around you. Instead, a better space is to process through some of this information. Students often get really afraid when I say a visual representation, and you'll see that note there at the bottom. The goal is not to create what is called good art, which then the question is, what even is good art? And so we want to separate the importance of hyperrealism is a thing, and realistic drawings are a thing, but that's not the only visual representation that's worthy of merit. And so I often give my students some time to kind of go through and use colors, use drawings. I model it on the board so that they can see what it looks like and it doesn't have to look all fancy, in order just to kind of process quietly the information that they just encountered, maybe without using words, because sometimes these things that we're encountering in our genocide classes are too heavy even for words. And then I will have students later on go and do kind of a silent discussion, so trade papers with someone around you. What did you notice? Oh, I noticed that you included this. You kind of gravitated to a part in the poem that includes this. Because again, it's hard after we've encountered some really difficult material to say, now go ahead and talk about it when you're at a loss for words. Something that I talked about in the panel earlier is in terms of trauma-informed education with control and then control and choice. Control is exit strategies, and again, everything that you're doing with this, you are agreeing upon as a classroom community. So you're not saying when you need to leave because something is too difficult, here's how you leave, because I don't know everything about my students and where they have come from. I don't know how they've processed the information. I don't even know if maybe they know some of the things that have happened to them in the past, and if that's going to be a light bulb moment where they finally realize in a class. And so we talk about, when we do those core values, okay, before a story exchange, before some of these things, how do you leave with respect and not look like you're just opting out of the material because you don't feel like doing it, but instead leave because you know that it's right for you. And then content warnings, I think, are really big, but the timeliness is a really important aspect. Content warnings cannot just be, okay, here's the handout, content warning, there's talk about sexual assault in this, because again, that exit strategy might be the only thing that a student has at that point. Instead, I recommend giving 24 hours before and posting a link onto maybe like a Google Classroom or a Blackboard or a Canvas with that material so that students by themselves can go ahead and decide, am I capable or am I okay with interacting with this material in public, or can I kind of sit with it on my own before coming to class? Truthfully, I rarely have students who opt out of even really difficult material, even if they are survivors, once I give them some time, 24 hours to process on their own. And then specific but not graphic language. And so telling them it includes something about self-harm, sexual assault, murder or kidnapping of children, but not directly stating every single little bit in that, because then that just completely goes against what a content warning does. I will just state that one time I forgot to give a content warning. My first time teaching this class, we were doing a graphic novel that follows a Shia Muslim woman who had gotten to know Yazidi women in captivity. And so she tells their story in this graphic novel. I completely forgot that there was pretty graphic mention of sexual assault, and I had a student who was a survivor, she had shared it with me, leave crying. And we had to have a conversation about that. She was okay with it, but knowing that I could have prevented that by equipping her with that information prior, rather than causing something, even though she wanted to interact with the material out of respect for the survivors, causing something that would be so re-traumatizing in the class. I had a student give me a little zine saying why you should take Holocaust Lit. The student has had quite a lot of things to deal with in life, but if you can't read his handwriting, it says, Sleeper warns about more graphic things, you can usually opt out. If you're wondering about like, well, does that mean that students are just gonna leave and opt out? I've had students who have kind of done it, you know, because they don't feel like doing the work, but then they do come around and say, well, that's maybe not the respectful thing to do. I'm only going to opt out if I feel like that is something that I need for me personally. So a little bit more information if you want. Nebraska Stories of Humanity, I am partnering with Dr. Beth Dotan at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and she works to make sure that our local Holocaust survivors in Nebraska have public information online that teachers and others can access. I've partnered with her to do a lesson to integrate Holocaust education with the Yazidi Genocide. So if you are someone who teaches about the Holocaust, you've done that for a very long time, you'd like to teach the Yazidi Genocide, but you're not sure how, that lesson will be published at the Nebraska Stories of Humanity website, hopefully by December 1st. It's not there yet, but it should be there soon. And then we have some further resources down here. Haroon mentioned Nadia Murad. That is her memoir there. I would highly recommend that, but note that it is difficult to get through despite it being less than 200 pages. The Beekeeper of Sinjar is an Arab-Iraqi journalist who is following a man who has done a lot of work with rescuing women who were in sexual enslavement in captivity with ISIS. And then I will let Haroon talk about the other two books, but I use Yasmin, the graphic novel over here. That's the graphic novel that I mentioned. It follows a Shia Muslim girl as she is relocated to the United States and as she's navigating that, but also carrying the stories of the Yazidi women that she met but did not survive along the way. Yeah, you can talk about the.
I think as I said, like, you know, the Yazidi community and the Yazidi religion and genocide has been extremely understudied and under-researched, but that doesn't mean there hasn't been any books about it. And one, so besides this book, there's many other books, but one that I really particularly stand out to me was one, it can be found on Amazon, but it's by Gerald Russell, which is titled, and I sent it to Kim. It's called The Heirs to Forgotten Kingdom, Journeys into the Disappearing Religions of the Middle East. And that one is, it talks about, specifically talks about, also talks about the Yazidis, it talks about the Sabaeans, Mandaians, and the Zoroastrians, and Alawis. So it really gives you a really good background information about these specific minorities who are on the brink of extinction. So yeah, that's the book. It's really good, and it's very narrative based. So you won't really, it's not like a very abstract. So it really includes a lot of stories. Even in this book, it's not going to be, you know, an extensive background about the Yazidi, because me from the Yazidi community, we have been averse to some scholars to come and study us because of the trauma, because of the experiences that we have gone through, and we have lost trust in the scholars to come and study us, because it would lead to misinterpretation of our communities. So a lot of that comes from you know, the lack of trust in our own leaders and our own and the scholars. It comes from the trauma, and that's something that has not been studied about our community, and the stigma, the stigmatization of the you know, the sexual slavery and the honor killing and all that sometimes plays a role in people and the Yazidi not trusting others who are not from the Yazidi community to come and study them, because there's always a room for misinterpretation of their religion. So.
Yeah, so if you want access to the slides, I have a shortened link here for you, or a QR code, especially if you're a teacher and you'd like access to some of these resources. Feel free to copy and paste the stuff. I get it, we are out there in the trenches, so please use it if you feel like that's appropriate for you. And then my email address and Haroon's is up there as well if you'd like to contact us with any additional questions, whether it's today, whether it's in 3 years, we would be happy to stay in contact with you.
Just 1 second. Thank you. Just a heads up that my goal getting into the grad school is to shed light on the experiences of my community. So I'm taking on my plan and my goal is to learn how to do research, how to use research in order to shed light on some of our experiences, even if it's a stigma, or if it's a mental health, or a sexual, like the sexual aspect of that is related to identity and disclosure and all of that. So I'm learning the knowledge from my grad program to be able to do some research. And we're also in a work of working with the couple individuals who have just graduated with their PhD programs in order to create a research hub where we can start researching on the Yazidi genocide and what came after the genocide in order to be able to really study them.
Wonderful. Thank you. I know we're out of time, so we won't have time for questions and answers, but I know that Kim and Haroon would be very happy to hear from you, either if you want to come up afterward right now or reach out to them. And you can reach out to me if you have questions as well, especially my students who are here. Thank you for being here. So everyone, please give them another round of applause and know that lunch is over here.